A surrender to Ukraine is coming. But it's not what you think. Putin isn't getting ready to pull his troops out. Can't. He's in a no-win situation, and his only option is to keep pushing blindly into his own failure. But behind the scenes in Russia, a white flag has been raised, and it's being waved with increasing ferocity. Russia's elites want to surrender to Ukraine. Putin is the reason why. His war is making them all poor, and if there's one thing that Putin should have figured out by now, you can't keep messing with the rich and their money, or they will turn on you and try to get away from the mess you made. The money men want out, and it's all Putin's fault. That's according to a June 29th piece by the Moscow Times, which has revealed that many of Russia's business leaders are trying to get their money out of the country amidst a constant bombardment of drone strikes by Ukraine and Putin's increasingly draconian measures to siphon as much cash out of them as possible to fund his war. A massive deficit has developed in Russia's national wealth fund, these elites are pointing out, and Putin is increasingly looking to them to plug the gap so that he can keep his war going. There are now rumors swirling around that the Kremlin will soon start digging into the elite's private savings to fund his war, and that Russia is already going so far as to confiscate deposits. As one Moscow businessman put it, "The government may try to get my money by any means necessary. Everyone is thinking about how to withdraw their money and leave." And he's right. We've seen a lot of cash withdrawals happening in Russia recently. United 24 media reports that Russians have collectively pulled $13 billion in cash out of Russian banks in 2026 up to June 8th. That marks a 30-year high for withdrawals, and it's far from coincidental. Russians of all stripes, from the elites down to everyday people, no longer trust their banks due to the potential that the Kremlin could commandeer their money at any time. Now they're getting their money out, which is as clear a signal to Ukraine as we've yet seen that some of the most important people in Russia outside of Putin and his political clan are ready to surrender. They see the financial pain that Ukraine is causing, and they are now voting with their pocketbooks. All of this is happening amidst a series of events that indicate how what is already a bad situation for Russia, its economy, and the people pulling out the money is only going to get worse. Ukraine's drone attacks on Russia's oil refining sector are becoming even more intense. 9 out of 10 of Russia's largest oil refineries have now been hit, United 24 media reports, and those strikes come alongside attacks on military facilities all across Russia. The authorities have only one response to all of this: spend more money on defenses. And that approach has led to Russia developing a $78 billion budget deficit between January and May that needs to be filled. The elites are looking at that gap, and they know that the Kremlin will be coming to them to fill it. They're not happy about it. As another Moscow businessman said, "There are not enough air defense systems to protect our infrastructure, that is clear. Nobody knows what to do to increase production. This is a terrible situation that Putin and his inner circle did not seem to expect. They did not prepare for a long war, and they are not ready for a drone war." It's clear where he believes the blame lies, as he's pointing out that the Russian people are now suffering because Putin and his Kremlin cronies didn't have the foresight to see that Ukraine wouldn't just roll over, and that it would instead evolve into a nation that could hit Russia at will. That's the situation today, and the elites are now arguing that Russia has to react to this situation by raising the white flag. Other events are even less promising. Do you remember how the war in Iran was supposed to be Russia's savior? Oil prices rose around or above $100 per barrel when the Strait of Hormuz was closed off, and that was supposed to pump billions into the Russian economy and save Putin from his own ludicrous spending. That's not happening anymore. An agreement between the US and Iran has dropped the price of Urals crude to around $50 per barrel, so the sun isn't shining anymore, and what little hay Russia managed to make has been quickly swallowed up. Speaking of the US, it has also been sending out signals that are like blaring warning lights to Russia's elite. Trump has actively praised Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the way Ukraine is defending itself, and he signed a joint declaration with other heads of state in the Group of Seven to recognize Ukraine's sovereignty earlier in June. Trump used the same G7 meeting to hint that the US could resume oil sanctions on Russia that it had suspended during the height of the Strait of Hormuz crisis, which would be a hammer blow to a Russian oil industry that is already reeling following the collapse of its assumptions that the good times would keep rolling. Putin has also signaled that he wants to dip his dirty hands into the pockets of Russia's elites and business owners to plug the gaps we mentioned earlier. Back in April, United 24 media reported that Russia is preparing to introduce a new windfall tax on what it deems to be excess profits. The elites and oligarchs won't be happy about that. They previously proposed making voluntary contributions to the Russian war effort. Putin clearly doesn't trust that those contributions will be enough. Now he's proposing a new tax that could climb as high as 20% on excess earnings, based on businesses' 2025 financial results. Russia has done this before, in both 2018-19 and 2021-22, delivering billions of dollars to the budget. But now, Putin is trying to play the same trick at a time when 75% of Russia's businesses reported a decline in revenue and profit, or outright direct losses for 2025. A little over half of Russia's companies saw that they now face cash flow gaps in 2026, and still, Putin wants more. There's only so much blood that can be squeezed out of this particular stone, and Russia's elites are signaling that they want to surrender to Ukraine to protect their own cash. Those elites see that their leader has created a failing system, and that he now wants their money to help him pick up the pieces that he will inevitably drop due to his Ukraine war tunnel vision. That's why they want out. They see the writing on the wall because the short-sightedness that caused all of this is simply the Russian way. At least that's according to Tatiana Stanovaya, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center. She says that all of these problems stem from Putin holding the dominant role in all aspects of Russian governance, to the point where actual coordination between different branches of the government is weak. This is the eternal problem of the Russian authorities, and a serious test for the Russian economy and population, Stanovaya says, adding, "But the question is whether the authorities have a plan of action or understanding about how to deal with this. The Kremlin does not have a plan." That's what has Russia's elites so scared that they're sending out so many signals that they're willing to surrender to Ukraine and push Putin into giving up his senseless war. But really now, are the elites going to turn on Putin? He made them, and he can do what he wants to them, right? Well, not really. It's a lot more complicated than that, and we're going to explain why. Before we do, you are watching The Military Show, and we deliver the analysis that lies behind the headlines. Hit subscribe now to make sure that you don't miss any of our videos. It's absolutely true that Putin very smartly took control over the oligarchs in Russia when he came to power. In the 1990s, that new generation of money men and women had more power over Russia than the political leaders who appeared in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin identified this as a problem when he became Russia's president in 2000, and he soon got to work on fixing it. And he started early, as NPR reports the summer of 2000 saw Putin invite 21 of Russia's richest men to a meeting at the Kremlin. Those men didn't know what was in store, probably another new leader asking for handouts. However, Putin wasn't what they expected. Russia's new leader gave the oligarchs a choice: bend the knee and follow Putin's lead, and they could keep the billions, the mansions, and all of the trappings of wealth. But oppose him and there would be consequences. Those oligarchs who refused or who later backtracked on the deal often found themselves dying in mysterious circumstances or languishing in Siberian prisons under charges of corruption. And in the many years since that fateful meeting, Putin has only strengthened his iron grip over the oligarchs, to the point where the path to getting rich in Russia flows directly through the country's leader. As the Carnegie Endowment puts it, Russia's ruling elite is less a political or economic class today, and more a collection of managers who do what Putin says and thus avoid scrutiny from anybody other than their leader. It's this parasitic relationship that Putin fostered that is the main reason why the richest in Russia haven't risen up against Putin, despite taking blow after blow to their bank accounts because of his war. Not much has changed in these relationships. Putin still holds sway over the major money men and women in Russia. But we're not seeing the Russian oligarchs migrate away from Putin in their masses, and they are not the only elites that Russia has. What we're seeing here is business people who are perhaps not multi-billionaires wanting to jump ship. It's these small and medium-sized business owners who run the companies that account for more than half of the jobs in the Russian economy. Small businesses alone contribute about a fifth of Russia's total economy, the Moscow Times reveals. And these are all companies that have to buy fuel and other products from the oligarchs overseeing the state-run interests and massive businesses granted to them by Putin. If these elites, more minor though they may be, are drawing their money out and surrendering, that's a massive problem for Putin. It's like taking the base away from a house of cards. The whole thing crumbles and every card ends up on the floor. Putin has already seen many of these mid-level elites take flight. During the early months after he started his invasion, the UK reported that 15,000 of Russia's millionaires were trying to get out of the country. Again, these aren't the oligarchs, but they're still in the upper echelons of Russia's society. They're elites, financially speaking, and they want it out. Now, as Putin digs his hand deeper into the pockets of not only the millionaires who remain, but of those a little lower on the totem pole who feel that they've given enough, he's creating the perfect environment for those people who want to raise the white flag. Putin is making them poor, all for a war that none of them really want. All of this is happening because Putin and his cronies couldn't see what they were unleashing when they started their so-called special military operation in February 2022. Ukraine was never supposed to become what it is today. Long-range drones weren't going to be hitting refineries every week. Russia wouldn't even be touched. The system that Putin created would work perfectly well as long as the war was contained to Ukraine, even as billions were spent on the fighting and hundreds of thousands of Russians died. The elites would still get their share, but now the momentum of the war has shifted in Ukraine's favor. Slow progress on the ground for Russia, assuming it makes any progress at all, is being compounded by the burning oil, the travel disruptions, the fuel shortages, and all of these other examples of the war coming home to Russia when it was never supposed to leave Ukraine. It's not just that money is being spent on the war, it's that Ukraine's strategy is making it harder and harder for Russia to make more money, which has the knock-on effect of hurting the elites. Those who have been spoiled by Putin's system in the past are being stung by it now, and they aren't going to suffer much longer before they turn against their leader. They're already doing it by withdrawing cash and trying to hide their money. Putin, as ignorant as he often is, can see the way that the tide is turning, and he's doing something to at least soothe the elites for a little longer so he can keep his war going. He's forcing the cost onto everyday people. Do you remember when we mentioned that Russian elites are pulling money out of their bank accounts because they're worried that the Kremlin will start seizing their cash to fund the war? They were onto something, because the exact proposal has come down the Kremlin pipeline, and it'll be everyday people who are forced to swallow the cost. That's according to a June 29th RBC Ukraine report, which says that discussions about seizing cash from Russians have been held at the highest levels of the Russian government as Putin desperately searches for ways to refill the National Wealth Fund and solve Russia's budget deficit problem. Proposals have been made by the leader of Russia's Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, who says that there is over $1.6 trillion just sitting in Russian bank accounts, waiting to be tapped up for the war effort. That money isn't being invested in production or anything else, not even in victory. This problem can be solved quickly. If I were president, I'd do it with a single decree. In wartime, he has the right to do so. He is the supreme commander-in-chief, Zyuganov declared. The Kremlin doesn't seem to be going that far, at least not yet. However, Russia's finance ministry is preparing a legislative framework that will allow it to tap into around $40 billion in Russian pension savings that are currently managed by private funds. Those funds will be transferred to a Kremlin-controlled pension system, thus allowing Putin to invest the money into businesses that support his war effort. The elites know what all of this means, which is why they're pulling their money out of bank accounts and calling for a surrender. But if Putin thinks that he can get away with taking yet another shot at the everyday Russian people with this kind of move, he's likely mistaken. This move won't help him. Not in the long term. It'll just create more angry Russians at a time when confidence in Putin is at lows not seen since the beginning of the invasion. Putin's approval ratings have been dropping for weeks now, to the point where the Kremlin-backed Public Opinion Research Center has changed its polling methodology to add in-person household surveys to the telephone interviews it typically conducts. It's a lot easier to intimidate someone into saying they're happy with Putin when you're staring them in the face. Putin has been trying to quell the sour mood that is developing in Russia by making more public appearances in the last few weeks, albeit few outside of Moscow. Russia's leader is trying to use himself as the sugar to make the medicine go down for those who he wants to screw out of their money. It's a bold strategy, but after more than 4 years of war and the economic catastrophe that Putin has already created, you have to wonder how well it will work on a war-weary population. Through it all, Ukraine is just going to keep doing what it's doing. Hit the money and the pressure on Putin will follow, forcing him into making the sorts of dumb decisions that turn everybody from the elites to the everyday people against him. The suffering that Ukraine is causing to Russia's more well-to-do is easily seen in Crimea, where photos of moneyed tourists crying because they can't get off the battered and isolated peninsula are starting to surface. The former commanding general of United States Army Europe, Ben Hodges, says that Ukraine's role in all of this now is to disprove the notion that Russian people are born and willing to suffer for their country. How far can that suffering go when Putin is pulling money out of your pockets and making your lives actively worse for a war that only he seems to care about? That's the question that Ukraine asks with every one of its strikes, with every battlefield victory, with every action that forces the Kremlin to dig a little deeper to fund Putin's war. Those who have suffered are being asked to do more, right up to the elites. That strategy can't work forever. A fall is coming for Putin, and his biggest problem is that he doesn't know what will cause it. Maybe those oligarchs who have been controlled for so long are plotting in the shadows because Putin's actions are starting to hurt them. perhaps the elites a tier or two down are going to cripple Russia, as much by keeping their money away from Putin's clutches and surrendering to Ukraine's power as any sort of tangible uprising. Or Ukraine may just keep pushing Putin to keep pilfering from his own people to the point where they can't take it anymore and have to rise up. Heck, the isolation of Crimea that we just mentioned may be enough to force a flood of Russians to flee back to the mainland via the Kerch Bridge, shattering the symbol of Russian dominance over Ukraine that Putin has been using to prop up his lies about the inevitability of Russian victory. Seeing the opposite of victory unfold along with all of the money issues could be enough to wake the Russian people up. The simple fact is that Putin is pissing off too many people inside Russia. The elites are riled up, and the everyday people are getting hammered financially. Putin is making them all poor, and he's on the verge of discovering why that's a really bad idea. It's not like Russia can recover from the economic problems that are making its elite surrender either. Something devastating has broken inside Russia, and there's simply no prospect of the country bouncing back until the war ends. The long-term consequences are as destructive as the short-term solutions, and you can find out why by watching our video. And if this video was your kind of thing, then subscribe to The Military Show to catch more of our analysis on how Russia is crumbling from the inside. And thank you as always for watching.